All right. So there it is again. It did it again to me. So we're definitely going to talk about truth tonight. And that obviously is that kicks off everything because if we have problems getting people to truth or we have our own issues with truth, it's going to be very hard to engage anybody about the truth claims of the Christian faith. So that's why we always start off with truth. It's really important. And I can share some of my own stories of what I'm seeing with this issue. No doubt about it. So, uh, oh yeah, this is the outline. Like I said, I just had this up here. I know some of you got the email. So we're going to just hang around number one tonight, talk about what exactly is truth? Is truth knowable? What are some of the objections against truth today, like some of the postmodern objections and some of the barriers to truth? So hopefully you will like I said, maybe some of this will you understand, or maybe it's all new to you. I don't know, but that's why we're here. Everyone's got to start somewhere. Okay, just a couple comments. I just want to read from a couple other Christian apologists. This comment here by Doug Grothites. He says, "In the end, hope without truth is pointless. Illusions and delusions, no matter how comforting, are the enemies of those who strive for integrity in their knowing and being." Okay, that's a pretty it's true. I mean, if you're hopeful about something, if it's not based in reality, it's not going to be very helpful to you if it isn't based in truth, no doubt about it. So we can give people, our culture today, sadly, because of the loss of truth, we sometimes tell people get told that just believing whatever you believe is just a way of having hope. If you believe it hard enough, that makes it true, and that's not what truth is. Um, So people just say, I just believe something so strongly, that gives me hope. But that doesn't mean what you believe is based in reality. And then we have a comment by Paul Copon, another Christian apologist theologian. He says, why believe anything at all? The quick and obvious answer is this: the reason we ought to believe something is because it's true, not because we prefer it, like it, or feel comfortable with it. And it is true, as we all know, that sometimes truth is not something that's comfortable. Sometimes truth is something that doesn't match with our personal preferences. Sometimes we like to believe things that we prefer, but that doesn't mean they're true. And that's just the way it is. So just 1 second. I'm sorry. I'm having a problem with my pet here who is causing me problems. Okay. So, anyways, let me just see one thing here. I'm sorry. I have to do something. Give me a second. I need to make sure everybody is muted because I'm hearing some. Yep, just as I thought. Someone was not muted. Okay, let's go back to that. Okay. Now, it's back on track here. So much stuff. Okay. So I think we probably remember, some of us are old enough, the famous line from Jack Nicholson in the movie A Few Good Men, and that brilliant exchange with Tom Cruise in the court scene where they get in this issue where Tom Cruise says, I want the truth. And of course, Jack Nicholson says, you can't handle the truth. And that's the way sometimes truth is. Sometimes we can't handle it. And sometimes it penetrates our comfortability, the comfortability we have in certain things. Sometimes we're very comfortable, and sometimes we like being comfortable, and sometimes we don't want to think in a different way, and sometimes we don't want to be confronted. But the reality of it is that truth has a way of doing that to us, right? Sometimes it jolts us. Sometimes it's like, oh, I need to change my thinking on this, right? So that's a great line from a great movie. Now, as I said before, I think it's pretty clear that none of us survive on a daily basis without truth. I think every single day of our lives, we have to have truth in our lives, or we simply cannot exist. I mean, when you guys go to your bank, you're expecting the bank to have true and accurate information about your money. You went to the doctor, you get a prescription, you obviously are thinking that's a true prescription, right? You trust your doctor, they've given you a prescription that's based in reality, that it's just the right thing to do and it's true. When you've taken a time to learn a class in college or elsewhere, you need true instructions, right? You don't want to waste your time on a class. The instructions are not true and accurate, right? You generally want your friends and family members to tell you the truth, even though that doesn't always happen. You certainly want our politicians to tell us the truth. Of course, that's a major topic for another time. And we want true instructions on how to use something we purchase. When you guys buy something in the store, the instruction manual needs to be true and accurate. Those are just a few examples of how we have to live off truth on a daily basis. Truth has to be something that we are, well, obviously, we're dependent on it for our survival. I just had an incident where I spent the last week or so dealing with an elderly parent trying to get good advice from medical people about what we need to do with my elderly father. I was trying to get true and accurate information, and I heard different opinions. I couldn't get a straight answer, and it's getting very frustrating. I'm thinking to myself, I just need truth. I need to know the truth. I need to know what to do here. So, we rely on truth in everything, no doubt about it. Now, something I've always said before, just a suggestion strategically, whenever you're talking to somebody about the faith and you get into a dialogue or you get into a long discussion or you get into questions back and forth or question and answer back and forth, one of the best questions you can always ask is what Frank Turek uses. I'm borrowing this for him. I'm borrowing it from him. I'm not going to plagiarize. I'm giving him the credit. Is you just want to cut to the chase sometimes. Just say, listen, I noticed you've been asking a lot of questions. I think I've answered some of them. I've shared the gospel with you. But if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? That means that if it's really based in reality, meaning that Jesus died and rose from the dead, would you give your life to him and follow him? Would you become a Christian? You will find people give you a variety of answers. Some people might say, yeah, sure, if it's true. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, if it's really true, how do I know if it's true? Well, that's someone who's seeking, right? And they're honest. But then you run into some people might say, no, not really. I had that happen just a few days ago with a student. A student asked me all kinds of questions, had all these objections. They were raised in the church. Now they're not saying they're saying they're not a Christian anymore. And now here they are at the end of the conversation. 45 minutes later, I asked them if Christianity is really true, do you be a Christian? They said no, because of the sexuality issue in the Bible, and they want to be bisexual. So they want to be a bisexual person and they don't want to follow what Christianity says about sexuality. So that's an issue, that's a moral issue, right? That's not necessarily an evidential issue. That's an issue that has to do with the morality of the Bible. So that's a great question to cut to the chase. And I said, well, then all the objections you've given me are not really evidential issues. It has to do with morality. So your heart is bent in a different direction morally, and you simply do not want to yield to God's design for humanity, sexually speaking. And she said, yes, that's right. I said, okay, at least you're honest. So that's always a good question to ask. Great question to ask people. Now, how do we as humans discover something's true? Just in general. Okay, just like in life, living our lives. Well, we know that we can't know everything. We know none of us are experts in every topic. I'm certainly not. And many of us, know people that are authorities in certain areas, right? You go to college, you listen to professors, they're supposed to be authorities in certain fields, historians or scientists or psychologists or whatever it is, biologists, chemists, whatever. And we know that we learn things through authorities. Okay, you certainly have to learn things through authorities. You wouldn't know anything. Okay, and we know that obviously we know this through history, and we know this through experience. We know this through things that have taken place in our country. Not just because someone's supposed to be an authority doesn't mean they're infallible, right? They certainly can be wrong. So authorities can certainly be wrong in many occasions, right? So just because you get information from an authority doesn't mean they're always right. And obviously you have to sometimes fact check one authority against another authority, right? And sometimes we know that authorities have conflicting views. People have just as much education one area, may find something different or come to a different conclusion to somebody else in the same with the same qualifications. So we definitely learn things from authorities. There's no way around it. Um, we know truth through our senses, like through our five senses that God's given us, through sight, touch, hearing, taste, smelling, right? Um, we just the reality it is that that's the way we're constructed. Like we experience the world through our five senses, right? So we certainly discover truth through our senses. We also discover truth through listening to the testimony of others. Like if you talk to a person that went through the Holocaust, a Holocaust survivor, and they tell you what happened, this is what happened, I was there, this is my testimony, I was in the Nazi camp, I can tell you about it. We hear all kinds of testimonies from people. We trust the testimony of the New Testament authors. We're trusting their testimony. They were there. We weren't there, right? Or just trust testimony in general from other people. Like if someone comes to you and says, "Yeah, I went skiing last week in Michigan. It was great. I had a great time. The skiing was great. I wiped out a couple times." You're trusting their testimony about what happened. So a lot of times we trust the testimony of others. Just the way one of the main ways we know truth. Obviously, testimony isn't always right either, but certainly that's one of the main ways we know truth. And also personal life experience. Certainly we learn truth or discover truth through personal life experience. We also learn truth, of course, through asking questions, probing, learning, asking questions, and then doing research and study. And we learn truth, of course, through using critical thinking and logic, which I'll talk more about in a minute. You don't research things and study things without using logic. Even if you think, well, I don't need that logic junk, I don't need it. You use it all the time. So I don't want you'll find out in a minute how there's no way around it. Okay. Now it is true that our understanding of truth can change over time because sometimes new evidence comes in, right? New information becomes available. There's many things that humanity has believed over time, like they believed something in a certain time period, but then more information came in and like, okay, well, that corrects our view of that. We thought this is the way it is, and that was our understanding then, but more information came in, right? And so that is true that we change our views sometimes because of new evidence that comes in. That's just the way reality works. Sometimes new evidence doesn't come in, and sometimes, you know, it's just it just depends on what it is. Obviously, science is always looking for new information and new evidence. Science is constantly changing. Okay, so as I'll say later on, science doesn't necessarily prove anything. Okay, so we'll talk more about that as we go on. Now, when you think of the difference between beliefs and truth, um, you say something's true, you're basically saying you accept something. When you say it's true, it's like factual. That's how you know something, right? You say, okay, this is true, and now I know, and I have knowledge about this thing. Okay. When we say something is true, you're making a claim about reality. Okay. That's why, see, this is the problem. Well, I'll talk more about it. I have other slides on it. But the point is that when we generally make statements that we think are true, we're making claims about reality, we're making claims about the world around us, right? And so there has to be some sort of factual basis on what we mean when we say something is true. Now, for example, like if someone said to me, well, John Wilkes Booth assassinated Abraham Lincoln, as we all know in history, shot him in the back of the head. If someone says to me, well, I don't like the fact that Lincoln was assassinated, so I don't think it happened. So their belief is that it didn't happen. But see, their belief has nothing to do with whether it happened or not. Okay, that has no bearing on whether it happened, because the claim about John Wilkes Booth assassinating Abraham Lincoln is a claim about reality, right? It's a claim about reality, and it's true because we have historical evidence that that really happened, right? So we're making a factual claim. So your belief has nothing to do with whether it happened or not. Okay, beliefs don't change history. You don't change what Napoleon did. Your beliefs don't change what happened in the Civil War. Your beliefs don't change what happened in the Holocaust or in slavery, whatever it is. Your beliefs have no bearing on that. Okay. The history is there and the facts are there and the evidence is there, and either you're going to accept the factual data that's there or you're not. Okay. Um, and just like, when it comes to God's existence, you run into this all the time because it's the impact of postmodernism, as I'll talk more about in a little bit. But, God, whether God exists or not, is not based on your belief. Okay. You believing God exists doesn't mean he exists. You believing he doesn't exist doesn't mean he doesn't exist. Okay. I run into people all the time. I don't believe God doesn't exist anymore. I'm like, well, that doesn't, just because you change your psychology, that has no bearing on whether he exists or not. You just change your psychology. Psychology has nothing to do with whether God exists or not. God's existence is a objective truth claim. Okay. It's a claim about reality outside of you, your preferences, your feelings, your emotions, your busyness in life, how much money you make or you don't make, how happy you are, how happy you're not, or unhappy you are, or whether you see the need for God or whether I don't see the need, I'm happy. That has no bearing on whether God exists. Nothing. Okay. He existed before you even came to even think maybe believing he existed. He either exists or he doesn't exist. It's a claim about reality outside of yourself. Okay. Same thing with Jesus's resurrection. Whether Jesus rose from the dead has nothing to do with whether you believe it or not. Okay. We're making an historical claim. Jesus rose from the dead in the first century in Israel. It's an historical truth claim. Okay. Just like Abraham Lincoln assassinated John Wilkes Booth. That's an historical truth claim. You can look at the evidence in history, you can weigh the evidence, then you can say, I choose to believe this or not. But your belief has nothing to do with whether it actually happened in history or not. Okay. And once again, Jesus' resurrection is not impacted by whether you're happy in life or not happy, or whether you have a lot of money or you don't, or how successful you are, or whether you believe it or not. That's an objective truth claim. It's a claim outside of yourself. It's got nothing to do with your preferences, your feelings, how you're doing in life, or anything. Okay. So what I'm saying is the thing about truth is that it exists beyond belief. It's true even if nobody believes it. Okay. If nobody believed Jesus rose from the dead, it doesn't mean he didn't rise from the dead. If nobody believes God existed, it doesn't mean he doesn't exist. If nobody believed that the universe had a beginning, it doesn't mean it didn't have a beginning. If no one believed that um, President Trump was just elected president, so I don't believe it because I don't like it. That's got no bearing on whether he's a president or not, obviously. So people get confused about this. It may sound very basic and kind of snarky, but I run into this a lot with people. They think that if I believe something, they'll say that's your belief in Jesus. That's your belief. Okay, that's your belief, and it's good for you, and it helps you. Okay, they don't understand that if it's true, if it's objectively true that Jesus rose from the dead, it's going to be true tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day. Your belief has nothing to do with it. It doesn't change it. Okay. All our faith does is accept and yield over to what God has revealed to us through creation and through history, right? Okay. Now, belief certainly can lead to truth because you can start out with a belief. Say, like I start out with saying, I'm a new Christian. I just became a Christian and I believe Jesus rose from the dead. I'm brand new in the faith. I don't really have a lot of good reasons for explaining why Jesus rose from the dead, but I read 1 Corinthians 15 the other day, and I choose to believe Jesus rose from the dead, and that's about all I know at this point. So you have a belief right there. But then what you have to do a lot of times, as is then you have to start working through your questioning, research, and critical thinking so that your belief is now strengthened, right? And now you see it's based in reality. Now you have good reasons for believing that this is based in reality, why this is true, right? So, like I say at the bottom here, if I believe Jesus rose from the dead, but not done any research at all to give reasons or evidence, why you believe that, you may believe it, but you're not confident your belief is actually true, right? You need to do some apologetics, do some more questioning research, and then you're like, oh, okay, I chose to believe this at the very beginning of my Christian faith. I believed it, by faith, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with faith. But now I have good reasons and evidence for why my belief is true. Okay. Now remember, you can have contrary beliefs and not contrary truths. Okay. So, if someone says to me, I believe that aliens exist, obviously I'm going to say to them, how do you know that claim is true? And do you have any evidence for that claim? They just asserted something. That's an assertion. Or I believe the aliens raised Jesus from the dead. Of course, I'm going to say, how do you know that claim is true? Do you have any evidence, right? So anyone can assert any belief. You can assert anything. I believe that aliens exist. I believe Jesus rose from the dead. Sure, you can say whatever you want and believe whatever you want. What's your reasons or evidence for your belief? What's your evidence for that claim you just made? As I generally say to people. But like I said, there's no way to know anything's true without basics of logic. We do not teach logic in public schools anymore. You learn it homeschooling and classical education, and which is a good thing because it would fix a lot of the problems we have in our culture, fix some of them at least. Because you think about when you're thinking, that's just any mental activity, whether you're believing or thinking about something, wishing, reasoning, supposing, even daydreaming. It's all thinking. And everybody uses some sort of critical thinking and logic. Logic is just the rules for correct reasoning. Um, when you guys hear anything in the media, when you're evaluating something in media, is that true? I don't know if that's true. Is there good evidence for that? When someone comes to you, as I'll talk about it, from a different religion and tries to witness to you, you're already starting to use logic right away. You're using reasoning to figure out whether this thing is really actually true. Should I accept this, or is this just a bunch of nonsense, right? Look what Paul does when he goes into the synagogue. Acts 17:3. It says, as Paul went in, as was his custom on 3 Sabbath days, he reasoned with them from the scriptures, explaining and proving that it was necessary for the Christ to suffer and rise again from the dead. It says in Acts 17:17, so he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons in the marketplace every day with those happened to be there. Acts 18:4, Paul, reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath and tried to persuade Jews and Greeks. Acts 19:8, and Paul, entered the synagogue and for 3 months spoke boldly, reasoning and persuading about the kingdom of God. So Paul is using some sort of reasoning skills with the Jews. He's going back and forth through the scriptures, talking to them, using reasoning skills with them, obviously trying to allow the Holy Spirit to open up their hearts and minds, which that's all he can do, is trust the Holy Spirit, what he's going to do with his audience. Okay. Now, you use these 3 laws of logic every day of your lives. Okay. These are part of your daily living. Okay. They're what we call the 3 laws of thought. Okay. There's something called the law of non-contradiction, meaning that nothing can be both F and non-F at the same time. The same way means, something can't be true and not true at the same time. And then we use what's called the law of excluded middle, where it means that any proposition is either true or false and not something in between. Then we use something called the law of identity, which says something is what it is and not anything else. Now, for example, I'll show you where this is in scripture. So let's say you open up Isaiah 45:5. It says, I am the Lord and there's no other. Apart from me, there's no God. It says, I am the Lord, there's no other. Apart from me, there is no God. Okay, so the law of identity identifies that it is the God of Israel who speaks. He's not any other God, right? The law of excluded middle says either it is true that this God is only the true God, or he's not that true God. It can't be both, right? It can't be the case. The Lord is the only God that is true for Christians, but false for Buddhists, right? He be the Lord of everybody. Then, of course, the law of non-contradiction, God can't be the Lord, Yahweh cannot be the only God in just one and many gods at the same time. It can't be one God and then many gods. That'd be contradictory, right? Um, Now, some people think, if you use logic, that makes God subject to human logic, but that's not true. God is the source of logic. Logic flows from the nature of God. Okay. God can't violate the laws of logic. Okay. He can't make like a square circle. Okay. He can't violate his own nature. God can't lie. He can't deny himself. He can't give false guidance. He cannot not, he has to tell the truth every time. He doesn't speak falsehoods. And so humans discovered logic, right? We didn't invent it, we discovered it, which is written in the fabric of reality. Some people think, like, if you quote that verse in Isaiah 55, 8-9, that the Bible says God thoughts are our thoughts, are higher than our thoughts, and human wisdom, or we might say human wisdom is the opposite of God's wisdom. That's kind of a misunderstanding there, because it is true God's thinking is certainly beyond our ability to understand it all the time, but it doesn't mean he violates the laws of logic, okay? Now, let me show you a big place you use logic, and that is definitely evaluating different religions, okay? So let's face it, if someone says all religions are basically the same, logically, no, they can't be, okay? They're contradictory in every way, okay? If Christianity is the only religion that says God is Trinitarian, meaning that it's one God, three persons, then obviously it's the opposite of what Judaism and Islam says, because they're Unitarian. They just believe in one God. We believe in one God. We just believe he's revealed himself as the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. That's not three gods. It's one God. I've already talked about this before. And then you have Hinduism, obviously, that you have one aspect of it philosophically that is monism, that says all is one. Then you have pantheism that says there is no personal God. It's all an impersonal God. Then polytheism is many gods. And that would be contradictory of both Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. That contradicts that. Buddhism doesn't necessarily even believe in a God at all. And so, of course, atheism doesn't believe in, atheism can't be true and Christianity can't be true at the same time either, right? So that's just logic right there. You're using the law of non-contradiction. They all can't be true. And that's why, when you look at something like what you see, that coexist bumper sticker on the back of a car, it doesn't make any sense, because everything the truth is they're all contradictory. That's why I use these little pamphlets on campus. Sometimes I use what's called contradict, because I show people, because you run a lot of people like that believe it. Oh, they're all the same. Pretty much all religions are the same. They're all trying to get to the same place. They're all about loving people and being moral and et cetera, et cetera. But then I walk them through that the claims of each religion are contradictory. They all can't be true. They may all have some truth in them, but at the core, they all can't be true. Okay. By the way, that's a free book online if you want to read a book on logic. Right there. It's a free PDF. You can download that. Anyway, this is all being recorded if you miss it. Okay. So what about truth being knowable? Can we know truth? And what are some barriers to people saying you can't know truth? Well, there are challenges to knowing truth today. And there's no doubt that postmodernism has been here for a while. This has been going on since the 80s. Seems like there's just, parts of postmodernism everywhere across our culture. So there was what we call the pre-modern era, and that's where most of us land in, because we believe God is like the center of knowing everything, and all authority comes from God. And there are things we can know because God reveals them, and God is the foundation of moral values, moral duties. He's the starting point of all reality, really, of knowing anything in reality. But then we kind of moved through the modern period with the Enlightenment, right? And then you had a time where science kind of became more dominant, as far as the way of knowing truth. Science is the pinnacle of knowledge. Some of the stuff, other philosophies came out at that time, David Hume, some other thinkers. And Rationalism became very dominant as well. We know things only through the mind, right? The mind's the starting point for knowing anything. And then kind of we had a couple world wars with World War One and World War Two. And postmodernism kind of came along and said we need to push back against any kind of certainty. We need to push back in anything that says we can know things with absolute certainty, and we need to get away from any philosophy or belief that says that we have everything figured out and we have this firm knowledge or firm certitude in anything. Part of it is reaction to how science became so dominant, and it played a role in the arrogance and the Holocaust of the Nazis, certainly believing that they had the truth, right? They thought they were the one true race. And of course, they killed a lot of people for that. So postmodernism kind of reacted to that a bit and said, there is no absolute truth. We really can't know anything for sure. What you believe is based on your culture, your perspective. It's based on truth as a social construct, just like they say gender is a social construct now. So that's pretty much still here. There's a lot of postmodernism here. There's still some modernism. Certainly doesn't mean, and there's still pre-modernism. There's aspects of these that are still around, but certainly postmodernism has created some challenges. Like I say, they tend to reject objective truth. A lot of people that fall into that camp, even though they might not even know it. They're suspicious of authority. They might kind of like these are kinds of people are kind of like I'm spiritual but not religious kind of people. You run into that sometimes, right? I'm spiritual but not religious. They like transcendence and kind of mysticism and spirituality, but they're not big on religion, right? But they're big on authenticity. Authenticity is important. They tend to think, as I said a little bit, that objective truth tends to exclude a lot of other voices. It leads to the marginalization of others. Okay. They think that sometimes you think you have the absolute truth that leads to a power grab where you're kind of in charge of everything. You think that like the Nazis, there was a power thing, they're in charge of everything. And they had these truth claims they believed about the Jews and other inferior groups. And we've seen that in other cases in history. So it's not that postmodernism, everything about it's bad. It's not that everything about it should be rejected. They make some valid points. But the problem we run into is that when people fall into this camp, it creates some challenges to us proclaiming Christianity as the truth, as the way, right? As the absolute truth. These books came out in the 80s, and everything they wrote in these books is still here today. The Death of Truth is written by a pastor that's not far from where I live, and Truth Decay by Doug Rotheis still is everything he wrote in that book's here today, same stuff. And so what you see sometimes when people are impacted by postmodernism is when you talk to them, because I see this a lot when I'm, of course, on campus. But a lot of people say like, well, Eric, if Christianity works for you, it makes a difference. That's all that matters, but it's not my thing. If it's really helping you in life, it's helping you be a better person and it gives you meaning and purpose, that's fine. But that doesn't mean, it's true for me. I had this, I'm telling you, I had this exact conversation with that same girl that was bisexual the other day. And she basically said this to me. She said, I mean, I have no problem with Christianity. I mean, people need that in life, they need something to cling to and it helps them, get through the world and gives them meaning. She's like, I have no problem with that. And, I think that's good for them. And I'm like, wait a minute, but you don't think Christianity is true, right? And she said, well, no. I said, so you're saying that it's better for someone to believe a lie in something that's not even based in reality, as long as it helps them in life and it makes a difference. You don't even care that it's not really true. They're believing something that is even true, but that doesn't matter to you. And she's like, well, I guess, yeah, I just think, I'm not sure it really matters. And I'm thinking to myself in the back of my mind, that is so postmodernism. That is just such a blatant impact of postmodernism on this person's thinking. It's everywhere. I see this all the time with people, sadly. But they think that, Christianity is like a preference. You prefer to believe in Buddhism, or you prefer to believe in Islam, you prefer to believe Christian, whatever works for you, helps you. Who cares if it's really true or based in reality, right? That's the impact of postmodernism. Not everybody believes this, but a lot of people have been impacted by it. Um, Another barrier to knowing truth is certainly the view that science is the only thing that tells us true, tells us what's true. That's been around for a while. Of course, that's a problem because science doesn't really tell us anything. It's the scientists that take the data and they interpret it, right? And then they present their findings to the public. So it's really silly to say like science as a noun tells us something. That's not true. Okay, it's the scientists that take the information, right? They dissect it, form their conclusions, then present it to the public. But science can't prove a lot of things. It can't prove logic, math, morality. It presupposes all those things. You have to know those things, even do math or do science. You have to have logic in place and math and morality. It can't tell us why the universe is orderly. Why it can't explain why it can be observed, why the universe is even observable to do science. That all those things are in place in order for science to happen. God put all those things in place so we can do science. It can't tell where the laws of nature come from because science depends on those. There is no science without the laws of nature. And it's certainly science doesn't deal with what we call metaphysical truths. That's what a lot of things that we Christians believe in what we call metaphysical truths, things that are beyond the physical world, or existential truths, like the big why questions, like purpose, meaning, why are we here? Science doesn't really deal with those things. And science, by the way, doesn't really prove anything. It does, if you say, if prove means like absolute certainty, then no, science doesn't give us that. It gives us observation interpretations that are never perfect. The information's incomplete. I have a book called The Ignorance of Science. I think it's called How Science Produces Ignorance. I think that's what it's called. Um, Science can only give us probabilities. Okay. And so it doesn't prove anything in an absolute sense. Okay. Sadly, though, because science so dominates people's thinking, they assume that a lot of beliefs, religious beliefs, are just based off in private subjectivity. It's like, there's no, you don't really know anything in religion. Like it's just faith and it's belief. It's subjective, it's private. And they think science is what gives us public objective knowledge. As things can be tested and we can look at those things and get absolute certainty. So it's created this dichotomy where like values and religious beliefs are cast off into that private subjective realm, and then facts are things that are verifiable by science and they're public and objective, right? And a lot of people believe that. They don't even know that they're doing that, but that's what they say. Like they'll say, "Oh, I believe things that can be tested. I believe in things that can be publicly verified," and they try to pull that card on you. Now, as far as truth, though, the nature of truth is that truth is absolute, definitely, because to say there's no absolute truth is an absolute truth claim, right? If someone would say there is no absolute truth, well, that's an absolute truth claim right there. Now, even though truth can be absolute, doesn't mean our grasp of it has to be absolute. Like God is absolute truth, right? We can't fully grasp God, though, right? We don't have to fully grasp God to say he's absolute truth. God is certainly an infinite being, right? When we're finite. Um, Sometimes people say absolute truth to believe it is oppressive, right? It's oppressive and you shouldn't try to impose your truth on others. Some people say, Jesus is the only way to be forgiven is an absolute statement. That's an absolute truth claim that Jesus is the only way to God. That's an absolute truth claim. People sometimes have a hard time with that. But if Jesus rose from the dead and he proved it by rising from the dead, then he has the authority to say that. Now, certainly there's a lot of people that believe in relative truth. It's like it sounds more tolerant and open-minded. It's like I said before, it's kind of like, I'm happy this Jesus thing works for you, but it's not my thing. Um, they tend to think that everybody has their own relative truths, they say truth is relative, but um, that doesn't really work in reality. Most people don't live that way. They don't live that way thinking that all truth is relative. That's just not the way they live their lives. Like if I say, well, gravity, if we both go to the top of a building and we look over the top to the bottom of the street, you're not going to say, look at your friend, and I'm going to say, well, I'm going to jump, and see what happens. And they say, well, gravity might work for you, but not for me. I mean, it works for some and not for others. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. So nobody lives out relative truth. They don't live their lives that way. Everything's just relative. Um, True story, a guy turned in a folder to a professor once, and he wrote a paper on why truth is relative, and turned the paper in a yellow folder as professor, and he wrote the paper on why truth is relative. The professor gave him an F on the paper, turned it back to the student, said, here's your paper. And the student said, hey, that's not fair. You gave me an F on my paper. And the professor said, well, I don't really like yellow folders. So you turned in your paper to yellow folder and I didn't like it. So, I decided to give you an F. And basically that was a way of showing the student that he's really not a relativist. He's an absolute. He believes in absolute truth because the student believes absolutely wrong for the professor to give him an F, just returning in a yellow folder. So nobody lives their life as a relativist. Now, biblically speaking, the words truth, emet, in Hebrew means there's a sense of firmness, stability, and constancy, and faithfulness, and unchangeableness or reliability. And then it's fairly similar in the New Testament in Greek. It means like factuality or reality, something that's evident. So they're somewhat similar, but certainly that's kind of the sense you get when you look it up in the Bible, if you look up all the words for truth in both testaments. Like I said before, the biggest problem we're having is people don't seem to know the difference between objective and subjective truth. They think that like subjective truth is, like everything's just a preference. Like I said, God's existence is an objective truth claim. It exists outside yourself. It transcends any opinions, right? Saying Jesus rose from the dead is objective truth claim. Saying the Holocaust happened is objective truth claim. Saying that President Trump is president is an objective truth claim. Saying that the Philadelphia Eagles are playing the Buffalo Bills is an objective truth claim, or whoever they're playing, I forget, the Commanders, I'm sorry. That's an objective truth claim. Okay. A subjective truth claim is based on preference, right? It's like I prefer chocolate ice cream, or I prefer to play tennis over golf, and people get these confused all the time. Okay. I see that happening a lot. Now, like I said before, you always want to challenge people on assertions. A lot of people like asserting things. They like, making claims like assertions. They might say, like I said, they assert that aliens raised Jesus from the dead, or there's thousands of universes out there, and we're just a chance accident. Our universe is just one like many. Those are all assertions. So they have to give evidence for their assertions, or you can challenge them to give evidence for their assertions. Okay. And as I said before, probably the main way people are viewing truth today is a few of these here, or a couple of these. Like people think truth is just whatever works, right? It's pragmatic. Whenever I have a Mormon or a Muslim say to me, I follow Mormonism, I follow Islam because it works for me. It helps me be a better person. Okay, that's not bad, but that doesn't make Mormonism or Islam true. Okay, I had a Muslim once say to me, it's helped me be more responsible as a father, and it's helped me, have a better purpose in life, and help give me direction. Well, those things are all important, but that doesn't mean Islam's actually true. Doesn't mean the Quran is true. It doesn't mean that the Quran's like a factual document. Okay. Because that's just, you can't use that as a test for truth in everything you're doing. Now, it is true that our culture is built on pragmatism. Everybody follows it. Like if I Try something doesn't work, I'll try something else, right? But that you have to be careful with that when it comes to religious truth claims. Okay. Truth certainly is not what just makes people feel good. Obviously, you guys know things that make you feel good aren't necessarily true. Like they're bad for you. Turns out that a lot of things we think make us feel good are not good for us, right? And that's because they're not based in reality. Bad news can be still be true, even if it doesn't make you feel good. Truth is not necessarily what's intended. Good intentions can still be wrong, and truth is certainly not what everybody believes. Some people think if a lot of people believe something, that makes it true. Well, everybody believes it, must be true. Not necessarily. There's all kinds of things people believe that masses of people believe that were certainly a lie and not true. Okay. Now, um, Natasha Crane, my friend Natasha Crane, has a great quote here. She actually has a new book that just is coming out in a couple weeks. But in her other book right here, I thought this was pretty good. She said here in her book, Faithfully Different, she says here, secularism isn't neutral. It's a worldview based on some very specific assumptions. Feelings are the ultimate guide, happiness is the ultimate goal, and judging is the ultimate sin, and God is the ultimate guess. And that's kind of where we're at as a culture. There's a lot of people believe that, right? They think, my feelings determine reality. We have that problem with transgenderism, of course. Or happiness is the all that matters is I'm just happy. They don't care if what they are pursuing is really based in truth. They just want to feel happy. And then judging is viewed as sin. You don't want to judge anyone or anything, even though that's a judgment for saying you shouldn't judge. That is a judgment. And then God is it's cool to just kind of guess about God, right? It's like, well, I'm not sure if God exists. Maybe he does, maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. I just kind of like, I'm not sure. You know where this happened recently? If you watch the Wesley Huff Joe Rogan podcast, whatever you think about Joe Rogan, I don't really care. I'm not really interested in debating that. But he had on a biblical scholar named Wesley Huff, and they debated Jesus. And Joe Rogan pretty much sounded like a freshman college student. He said, well, I believe there's something to set off the universe, but I'm not really sure about Jesus. I don't know if we can really know. And something happened though. I mean, Jesus changed history, and but I don't know. I mean, I'm not really sure if we can really know. And there's all these different opinions, blah, blah, blah. And so it's just easier to say in agnostic land for him, just be agnostic about Jesus. Believing in God is easy. Anyone can believe in God, right? But Jesus is the ultimate question. What do you believe about him? So if you get people that obviously God's not the center of their life, then obviously they're going to determine everything. They have their own determination about moral truths. They have their own views on what people group has value, dignity, and rights. They are the ones that determine what the world should look like, and they determine what happiness is. It's all based on their subjective personal opinions, right? Because they have no foundation for that. It's just going to be themselves. There's a lot of people like that, right? They're trying to navigate reality on their own. I said that to that bisexual girl last week. I said, look, you're free, man. You're free to just figure out the world on your own if you think you can do it. Most people are not finding that to be very easy. Okay, let me finish up on a couple things. So there's no doubt when it comes to God that God is truth. Truth flows from his nature, right? That's one of his moral attributes. God doesn't get truth and give it to us. He doesn't work on truth. He doesn't read textbooks. He is truth. Okay. And his goal for us is to be conformed to the truth. Excuse me. Throat is dry tonight. I'm sorry. But truth proceeds from the nature of God. So when you guys ask for wisdom from God, God, give me wisdom about this. I need to know what to do. I'm not sure what to do. I'm in this crisis. Give me decision making. Give me wisdom. You're basically asking God to reveal the truth to you about the situation, his truth, how he sees the situation. He wants you to know the truth. He wants you to grasp the truth, and he wants you to obey the truth. That's what he wants. Sometimes what we do is we ask God for wisdom. He shows you what it is, and then I'm not sure. Let me think about that for a while. All right. Then we kind of just play around, right? But God wants you to know the truth so that you will grasp it and then act on it, right? We know that in the Bible that people in the last days will turn aside from the truth. Of course, the last days are going on in the first century as well. Um, people will turn away from hearing the truth and they'll turn aside to myths. As Paul says, they'll, that's what's going to happen. That's been here for 2,000 years. It's happening today. It happened then. It's happening now. People turning away from the truth. They turn away from sound teaching or sound doctrine, right? And that's why we need to know true and false doctrine. You need to know basics of biblical doctrine so you can discern the truth. So you're not led astray by false doctrine. That's how people get into cults. I run into cults all the time. And it's really because people are just ignorant. They just don't know the truth. They're just ignorant about biblical doctrine. They just don't know basic doctrine. And then they're searching in life, and then the cults come along and just snatch them up because they just don't know anything. And then we know in the Bible there's a difference between true and false spirits. We know John talks about this in First John, about there's spirits, we need to test the spirits, and those that say Jesus didn't come in the flesh, that he's not God, certainly are not from God, right? Those are false spirits. We know that Paul admonishes people about, in Galatians, about presenting a different gospel, right? A false gospel. We have ways to test the spirits. We know that if it's something that contradicts the gospel, it's a false gospel, or about anything is the opposite of what apostolic teaching is, we know that that's not coming from God. We're also, just to kind of reiterate, we're called to know the true gospel, and obviously a lot of the false gospels out there. There's a lot of false gospels, but we should know the true gospel. And then obviously we have to build our convictions. And you build your convictions through study, through experience, through thinking through things. Sometimes the beliefs need to be tested, right? When we're in dialogues with other people, and sometimes people challenge us in our faith, right? And we're having conversations with other people. But we're all hopefully strengthening our convictions, and that's through life. That's through life, and we do that nonstop. Okay, I have stronger convictions maybe in some areas than I had 20 years ago, right? Or sometimes convictions grow and develop, and sometimes maybe you rethink things. It's like, that's the way it is, right? And then sometimes if we have certain things where there's areas we're not really confident in our faith, we need to sometimes buckle down and study harder and build a confident faith, right? And that's what J.P. Mullen writes about in Search of a Confident Faith. Okay. And then finally, remember that God is truth, as I said, but he uses truth to change us, right? So when you're listening to sermons every week in your church, I hope that the goal is to have active listening. Okay, you're listening attentively for God to speak through the word, because he may be trying to deposit something in your life, some truth that's going to transform your circumstances or transform you. God obviously speaks truth through the word when we read the word. That's true through prayer, through others, through community. We get changed through suffering, struggle sometimes, but truth is supposed to change us, right? God wants us to know the truth, and he wants us to act on the truth. So we know that finally that Jesus taught us to speak the truth in love. So it does no good just to love someone nonstop if you don't speak the truth into their lives. Okay, you can love them into destruction. We all know people may have addictions and you just keep loving them, but if they don't take steps of action to change that addiction, they can destroy themselves, right? And Jesus calls us to speak the truth in love. He did that with a Samaritan woman. He did that in his ministry. Some people Christians really struggle with that. They just think, well, you just got to love people. Yeah, you do need to love them, but truth is what really sets them free. The truth is what sets them free, right? They need to believe the truth and act on the truth. I'm dealing that with, I had somebody come to me this week with a major decision in life. They're struggling, and It's exactly what I said to him. I said, God wants you to know the truth and act on the truth. So what do you think the truth is? And so that's truth is important. All right, so that's about it. Wrap up there for now, and we'll talk about anything you want.